There is a place on Earth where fighter jets go to die. Not in combat, not through mechanical failure, through something more fundamental: inability to start. The Arctic, at minus 40 degrees, metal contracts, hydraulic fluids thicken, batteries lose charge, engines that roar to life in temperate climates simply refuse. For decades, this was Canada's quiet vulnerability. The second largest airspace on the planet, three coastlines, vast northern approaches, patrolled by aging aircraft stretched thin, operating at the ragged edge of their design limits. Then came the F-35, the most advanced fighter ever built. Stealth, sensor fusion, networked warfare, the absolute pinnacle of American aerospace engineering. And then came the Gripen, a jet from a small neutral country that hasn't fought a war in 200 years. A jet that defense analysts spent 2 decades dismissing as a budget option. But here's what those analysts missed. The Gripen was designed for the apocalypse, not a clean, linear war with pristine runways, unlimited fuel, and perfect satellite coverage. The war Sweden planned for, the war that never came but shaped every line of that aircraft's DNA, was the war where everything breaks, where air bases are cratered in the first hour, where command networks are jammed or destroyed, where centralized logistics collapse and each squadron must survive on what it can carry, improvise, and protect. The Gripen was built to start when frozen, to land on highway strips, to be refueled and rearmed by a handful of conscripts with minimal equipment, to keep flying when every assumption about modern air power has been bombed into rubble. The F-35 was built to dominate. The Gripen was built to survive. And now, Canada, facing a deteriorating relationship with its closest ally, an $8 billion cost overrun, and the most consequential defense decision in a generation, must choose between dominance and survival. And today, we're not talking about kill ratios or stealth coatings. We're talking about doctrine, about the assumptions that shape how nations prepare for war, and what happens when those assumptions prove wrong, because the United States just made its position unmistakable. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, on the record to CBC News, if Canada steps back from the F-35, the United States will step in. More American aircraft, more American patrols. NORAD itself may need to be restructured. That is not a diplomatic comment. That is not a negotiating position. That is a warning. And it reveals something the Pentagon never intended anyone to see. They are afraid of what happens if Canada chooses independence. Let's start with geography. The Canadian Arctic is not like other theaters of operation. It is vast, 1.4 million square kilometers of islands, ice, and open water. It is empty. No infrastructure, no civilian population centers, no redundancy. It is unforgiving. Temperatures that defeat machinery, distances that exhaust pilots, weather that grounds even the most capable aircraft. For 75 years, this environment was managed through trust. Canada patrolled the North. The United States provided the backbone of continental defense through NORAD. The arrangement was informal, cooperative, and unquestioned. America had the capability, Canada had the territory. It worked. Then 3 things happened simultaneously. First, climate change opened the Arctic, new shipping routes, new resource extraction opportunities, new strategic competition. Russia rebuilt its northern bases. China declared itself a near-Arctic state. The region shifted from frozen backwater to emerging frontline. Second, the F-35 program's true costs became impossible to ignore. The Auditor General revealed that Canada's 88 aircraft fleet would cost not $19 billion, but $33 billion, a 75% increase, much of it driven by the infrastructure requirements of operating fifth-generation fighters from austere northern bases, requirements that were systematically excluded from early estimates. Third, the political relationship with Washington deteriorated. Tariffs. The first state rhetoric. An ambassador declaring we don't need Canada. The implicit trust that underpinned NORAD for generations suddenly felt conditional. And into this perfect storm stepped Saab, with an aircraft designed for exactly this environment. The Gripen has started in Sweden at -40. It has operated from snow-covered highway strips during Arctic exercises. Its turnaround time, the minutes between landing and being ready to fly again, is measured in single digits. Its ground support requirements are minimal enough that a dispersed team of technicians can keep it flying indefinitely without a fixed base. These are not marketing claims. These are operational realities demonstrated over decades of Swedish defense planning against an adversary, the Soviet Union, that explicitly targeted air bases as first strike priorities. The F-35 requires a 100-ton electro-optical targeting pod hoist just to perform certain maintenance tasks. It needs continuous digital connectivity to receive mission data updates. Its stealth coatings require climate-controlled hangars for repair. None of this diminishes its combat capability. In a high-intensity conflict against a peer adversary, with full support infrastructure intact, the F-35 is unmatched. But the Arctic is not that environment, and the war Sweden planned for assumed that infrastructure would not remain intact. This is where the debate shifts from aircraft performance to military doctrine. Modern NATO air power is built on a model of centralized excellence, massive fortified air bases, sophisticated maintenance facilities, constant digital connectivity. The assumption that forward operating locations will remain secure and functional. This model maximizes capability. It also creates single points of failure. Adversaries have noticed. Russian doctrine explicitly targets air bases in the opening hours of conflict. Chinese doctrine emphasizes anti-access area denial, attacking the support systems that enable high-end fighters rather than the fighters themselves. The F-35 was designed for this threat environment. Its stealth allows it to operate from bases that may be under observation or attack. Its sensor fusion provides unparalleled situational awareness, but it cannot operate without those bases. The Gripen was designed for a different threat environment, one where bases are attacked early, command networks disrupted, and centralized planning overwhelmed. Its design philosophy is survival through dispersion. This is not about replacing high-end fighters, it's about preserving them. If a peer adversary destroys the runways at Cold Lake and Baggetville, Canada's F-35s have nowhere to land. If the digital networks that supply mission data are jammed, their sensors degrade. If the logistics pipeline from the United States is disrupted, by conflict, by political pressure, by any number of plausible scenarios, the fleet becomes a collection of very expensive, very inert sculptures. Gripens dispersed along highways and remote strips would still be flying. This is not a hypothetical concern. The United States Air Force itself is actively exploring agile combat employment, a doctrine that explicitly moves away from centralized bases toward distributed operations. The lessons of Ukraine, where Russian missiles destroyed Ukrainian Air Force infrastructure in the opening days, forced a fundamental reassessment of how modern air power must survive. The F-35 was not designed for this doctrine. It can be adapted to it, at enormous cost and with significant capability trade-offs. The Gripen was built for it. Which brings us to Pete Hoekstra, the U.S. ambassador to Canada, the same man who told the world, "We don't need Canada," sat down with CBC News and delivered a message that was carefully worded and absolutely unmistakable. Canada's plan to buy 88 F-35s directly affects continental defense. If Canada steps back, the United States would step in. More American aircraft, more American patrols. NORAD itself could require restructuring. Let's translate that from diplomatic language into plain English. If you don't buy our jets, we will put more of our jets on your territory. We will fly more missions over your airspace. We will assume responsibilities you have historically claimed as sovereign functions, and the bilateral command structure that has managed continental defense since 1958 will be reopened for negotiation. This is not about capability gaps. It is not about operational requirements. It is about leverage. The United States spent decades building a system where allied defense procurement is not just a transaction, it is a relationship management tool. Countries that buy American integrate into American logistics, American training pipelines, American command structures. They become dependent, and dependence creates alignment. Canada, by even considering an alternative, has broken the script. He was threatening a country that had already decided it could no longer afford to be threatened. The tariffs, the 50 a first state comments, the dismissal of Canadian sacrifice in Afghanistan, the geo-locked commercials celebrating Canadian tears. Each of these individually survivable, collectively transformative. Canada is not rejecting the F-35 because it's a bad jet. Canada is rejecting the relationship that comes with it. This leads to the most important conceptual shift in this entire debate. Autonomy is not binary. No nation, not even the United States, enjoys absolute defense independence. Supply chains cross borders. Intelligence is shared. Alliances require compromise. The question is not whether Canada can achieve total freedom from American influence. The question is whether the degree of dependence is negotiable. Under the current F-35 model, Canada's operational autonomy is severely constrained. Software updates flow from the United States. Canada cannot modify them, cannot audit them, cannot verify what changes are made. Mission data files, the libraries of threat emissions and electronic signatures that enable the F-35 sensor fusion, are generated by the United States and distributed to allies on a schedule Washington controls. Cryptographic keys required for secure communications and weapons employment are managed through American systems. Sustainment and repair of certain components can only be performed at designated facilities, many located in the United States. Export of any F-35 component or technology requires U.S. State Department approval. This is not unique to Canada. Every F-35 customer except Israel operates under these constraints. It is the price of admission to the most advanced fighter ecosystem in existence, but it is also a structural vulnerability. Saab's proposal directly addresses this vulnerability. Not by eliminating dependence, the Gripen's engine is American, its radar may incorporate foreign components, but by reducing it to manageable dimensions. Full technology transfer, domestic production, independent upgrade authority, control over weapons integration, the ability to sustain the fleet without continuous American approval. This is not independence. It is resilience through redundancy. Canada would still cooperate with the United States. It would still integrate with NORAD. It would still fly alongside American aircraft in defense of the continent. But it would not be dependent, and that distinction between interdependence and dependence is what this entire debate is really about. Here is what truly unsettles Washington. It is not the aircraft, it is the precedent. If Canada successfully reduces its dependence on American controlled defense systems while remaining a fully integrated NATO and NORAD partner, every other ally will ask the same question. Why can't we? Germany is already asking. Friedrich Merz, leader of the opposition CDU and a candidate for chancellor, has publicly questioned whether Europe can afford to remain dependent on American nuclear guarantees. His party has floated the possibility of triggering cancellation clauses in Germany's F-35 contract. The United Kingdom, despite being the closest American defense partner, is investing billions in its Tempest sixth-generation program, explicitly designed to preserve sovereign combat air capability. France never bought the F-35. It built Rafale. It kept its independence. Japan, originally an F-35 customer, is now co-developing the Global Combat Air Program with the UK and Italy. The pattern is unmistakable. Allies are hedging, not because they plan to leave the alliance, because they can no longer assume the alliance will remain stable enough to guarantee their security unconditionally. Canada's debate is the most visible expression of this trend. But it is not the cause. It is the symptom. And Hoekstra's warning, if Canada steps back, the United States will step in, is the system's attempt to suppress the symptom before it becomes a contagion. But it is too late for that. The contagion has already spread. Let's return to where we began, the Arctic. In 2026, Canada's sovereignty over its northern territory is not contested. Yet. But the capabilities required to assert that sovereignty are increasingly strained. Russia has rebuilt its Arctic bases. Its northern fleet operates year-round. Its long-range aviation patrols have resumed Cold War patterns of probing NATO airspace. China declares itself a near-Arctic state and invests in polar infrastructure. The United States, distracted by global commitments and domestic turbulence, cannot be assumed to prioritize Canadian northern defense indefinitely. This is Canada's responsibility, not NORAD's, not America's, Canada's. The F-35 is an extraordinary instrument of air power. It can penetrate defended airspace, engage advanced adversaries, and contribute to coalition operations far from home. The Gripen is an instrument of sovereignty. It can patrol vast distances. It can operate from austere strips. It can be sustained by Canadian industry, upgraded by Canadian engineers, and flown by Canadian pilots without seeking permission from any foreign capital. These are different tools for different missions. Canada needs both. The debate is not whether to abandon high-end capability for low-end efficiency. The debate is whether $33 billion should purchase dominance without control or capability with sovereignty. That is not a technical question, it is a political one. And this is where Ottawa has made its most significant move, one that has largely escaped public attention. Defense Minister Bill Blair, in a series of unscripted remarks, has begun using a phrase that does not appear in any official defense policy document. Post-dependence, not anti-American, not isolationist, not withdrawal from alliances. Post-dependence. The recognition that cooperation does not require subordination, that integration should not mean loss of control, that alliances in the 21st century must be negotiated relationships between sovereign equals, not hierarchical structures with a single power center. This is not rhetoric, it is doctrine. Canada is not seeking to leave NORAD. It is seeking to renegotiate NORAD's terms. To move from an arrangement where American assets provide the bulk of capability and Canadian assets provide the bulk of territory, to an arrangement where both partners contribute sovereign capability under shared command. That requires Canada to actually have sovereign capability. which brings us back to the fighter decision. The F-35, for all its extraordinary capabilities, does not confer sovereignty. It confers access to an American-controlled system. The Gripen, for all its compromises, does confer sovereignty. It confers the ability to generate, sustain, and control combat air power independently. Canada is trying to preserve both. The hybrid model, 16 F-35s for high-end integration, 72 Gripens for sovereign capacity, is the operational expression of post-dependence. It acknowledges alliance realities while building strategic redundancy. It is expensive, it is complex, it is politically uncomfortable for both Washington and Ottawa. It is also the only honest answer to the question Canada is actually asking. For 80 years, the United States guaranteed the security of its allies in exchange for their trust. That bargain produced the longest period of great power peace in modern history. It built an alliance system that deterred Soviet expansion, stabilized Europe, and created the conditions for unprecedented prosperity. But bargains require both parties to uphold their end. When one party begins treating the other's sacrifices as irrelevant, its sovereignty as conditional, its economic partnership as a tool of coercion, the bargain erodes. Not through dramatic rupture, through accumulated attrition. Canada is not leaving the alliance. It is not rejecting American partnership. It is not choosing isolation over integration. It is simply building insurance. Insurance against the possibility that the guarantor may not always be reliable. Against the reality that dependence, once entrenched, is difficult to reverse. Against the recognition that sovereignty, if not exercised, atrophies. The Gripen is not a rejection of the F-35, it is a hedge. And the United States, by warning Canada against this hedge, has revealed something it never intended to reveal. They are not afraid of Canada choosing the inferior jet. They are afraid of Canada proving that the choice exists at all. Because if Canada can build sovereign capability while remaining an integrated ally, every other nation in the American alliance system will ask the same question. And that question, why can't we, is the one no amount of tariffs, threats, or warnings can answer. What do you think? Is Canada right to hedge against American unpredictability, or is the F-35's capability worth the dependency cost? Can post-dependence coexist with alliance integration? And if Canada succeeds in building this model, how many others will follow? Let me know in the comments if you want to track these defense and geopolitical shifts before they become headlines. Hit subscribe and ring the bell. We're watching the signals the rest of the world misses.